Hello and welcome to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I will be doing a review of The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now the first time I read this incredible, yes I said it, incredible novel was actually to my surprise 12 years ago. I thought I'd read this for the first time around the age of 18, but then while I was preparing material for a My Life in Reading video, I found in a diary that apparently no, I read this the same year I read Lady Chatterley's Lover for the first time. I have absolutely no memory of that whatsoever. In any case, I reread this a week ago now, and what a great experience it was. So first I'll introduce the overall premise. So The Left Hand of Darkness is a novel in Ursula K. Le Guin's Hainish cycle. That's basically her main body of science fiction work. Like all her major science fiction novels except one basically are set in the Hainish universe. The Hainish universe central idea premise is that humans from the planet Hain have colonized several planets including Earth. And after a certain amount of years have passed, they kind of join together in the Ecumen, which is a league of planets, but their goal isn't strictly political. It's kind of like a humanist association of planets to share technology, information on culture, facilitating communication. Basically, I mean, it comes from, the Greek word for Ecumen. I think it's used by the Christian church, which means like it's a community. It wants to foster the human community across the universe. The Left Hand of Darkness takes place on the planet Gethen, or Winter in English. It's a planet at the farthest reaches of, the Ecumen, and an envoy from that body is sent to Gethen to try and convince those people to join the Ecumen, because they've been isolated ever since they were colonized by the Hainish ancestors. Now, what's particular about Gethen, or Winter, as you might have guessed from the name, is it's a very, very cold planet. There are no flighted animals, there aren't any mammals. I mean, it snows basically 10 months out of the year. And more weird are the people of Gethen. They are humans, technically, but they are, Ursula K. Le Guin uses the word ambisexual. They're basically hermaphroditic, if you will. I mean, truly hermaphroditic. They can be both functionally male and functionally female, like a week, 10 days out of each month. They become fully male or fully female, and they have strong sexual urges and they can reproduce, and the rest of the time they're androgynous. They're like in a, I don't want to say neutered state, but like a childlike state. It's a potential state. They're both and neither male and female at the same time. And that's a very, very important part of the book. And so this envoy from the Ecumen called Genly I is sent there to try and convince one of the main countries of Gethen to join the Ecumen. And he gets, there's political intrigue, and he has a lot of interactions with the other main character called Astravan, or Therum, but he's called that later on in the book, so I'm going to call him Astravan. And I use he, I'll get into that. Astravan, who's a prime minister of the country in which Genly I is present. And then that kind of goes to crap, and they have to go into exile into a neighboring country called Orgarain. The country in which Genly I arrives is called Karhide. So from Karhide they go to Orgarain, and then there's a trekking through the Great North. That's basically the general premise. Now, as usual, to start off, a note on the writing. There's something about this story, about reading about Gethen and Genly I's and Astravan's story and journey. You really feel you're there. Like you can feel the cold of Gethen. You can feel the isolation the characters go through. There's something stark like winter, like the cold, yet extremely beautiful and elegant as well, like snow falling. Though those wintry elements that are bleak and stark and at the same time dazzlingly beautiful and elegant and crystalline. There's also like a running theme of spirituality, because some of the people of Gethen, the Karhidish, that country, they have a religion that's very supposed to be reminiscent of Taoism. And I know for a fact that Ursula K. Le Guin translated the Tao Te Ching, so I think she was somewhat familiar with that spiritual movement. Again, it's hard to put into words precisely precisely, but taking a deep dive into the world. And the story of The Left Hand of Darkness it's a fully immersive experience. You just really feel you're there. You feel what the characters are going through. It makes you think, it makes you feel things very deeply, but also very calmly. There's something very meditative about this, actually. Now, the way the story is written, basically one chapter is one of the main characters narrating what is happening, and then, as is often usual in Ursula K. Le Guin's novels, full-length novels, they're like, field notes. A chapter will be a story of Karhaidish law, or like, anthropological field notes from the... So the way the ecumen works is first they send in like a scouting team. They kind of have to be very discreet about it, and they have to study the people of the planet they're surveying before they can decide whether they want to invite them into the ecumen or not. So you've got notes from those people, especially about, the very weird physiology of the Gethenians. And then so you kind of alternate between Genly I's point of view and Astravan's point of view. So there's like a double narrative and also like a direct narrative with notes going on, but the story is linear. There are no flashbacks and no flash forwards. So it's a linear narrative. It's a pretty straightforward progression in the story. So it's a story about establishing a rapport between, aliens, more or less. There are all humans, but the Gethenians are really weird. I mean, they've almost become a different kind of subspecies of human in a way. So between two aliens, Genly I, who is a man, he's a male, and then he has to interact with these people who are fundamentally both male and female, and neither most of the time. So you've got this contact between alien beings, establishing communication and a relationship, bridging the divide of difference and of misunderstanding. There's also a lot of political intrigue. Or, no, it's maybe not political intrigue, but there's a lot of, I'll come back to this when I talk about themes in more detail, but politics and nationalism and patriotism are a central theme of the novel. And so there is kind of a thread of political intrigue with, you've got the country of Karhide, which is a monarchy, and then you've got the neighboring country of Orgarain, which is kind of communist, I suppose, or centralized and very bureaucratic at least. But it reminded me of the USSR. So very different political structures, and you kind of see what the difference is. And at first, Genly I kind of thinks, the Karhaidish are more backwards because they're under a monarchy. But in the end, you kind of see that all the bureaucracy and the backstabbing going on in Orgarain are in a way almost worse. It's also kind of a story about, it's a great journey. Quite literally, there's a lot of movement going on in the story, going from a place into the wild, into the great north. So it's a journey. And then the theme of coming back home, or for Genly I, it's not really home, but coming back to a place of safety and to the home, to the hearth. So I think that's also a narrative structure present in the novel. And otherwise it's, again, but this is, typical of Le Guin, it's very psychological. A lot of the journeying is internal. Fundamentally, it's about what is it to be human, but to recognize the difference in the other and to go beyond that difference. So you have two main characters, Genly I. So, like I said, he is a Terran man. I would say he has very good intentions. So he's an envoy from the ecumen, and he really believes in the ecumen's manifesto or, mission statement. He's very well intentioned, but perhaps a bit too idealistic and naive, because fairly quickly in the story you can see he bumps up against roadblocks put in by the fact that the Gethenians just function differently from Terrans because they don't have sexual politics. They do have politics, and they have a complex system of, I want to call it honor. They don't really define it, and he seems to have a really hard time defining what it is. It's called Shifgrethel. It's this thing Gethenians place a lot of importance on. I kind of see it as an honor system. Not sure if that's what Ursula K. Le Guin was going with. That's how I perceived it. So giving someone advice when it's not solicited can be seen as offensive, touching upon their Shifgrethel in a negative way. It makes their interactions very complicated, unnecessarily complicated. You have to respect the other person's Shifgrethel, and you can't be too brutal. You've got to say the truth, but you've got to kind of circumvent it and present it in a subtle way. It's very layered and complex. Now, another weird thing thing is he's not misogynistic. He's not even that sexist, but he does cling to a few sexist stereotypes because he qualifies the way Gethenians act as being masculine or feminine. Now, of course, for them, it doesn't actually mean anything because most of the time they're in this in-between state. They're only fully male or female like 10 days out of every month. So it doesn't mean anything for them to qualify, like delicate, elegant behavior as feminine or assertive, strong-willed behavior as masculine. And yet he typifies it as such, only to end up accepting the fact that he just can't do that. It doesn't work with these people. He has to let that go. It's a subtle and subdued arc of personal growth, but you do see him coming to terms with the fundamental difference of Gethenians and accepting it and seeing through this alien difference to the human in those people. And then you have Astravan. I'm going to use the pronoun he to refer to him. In The Left Hand of Darkness, it is kind of explained that the male is taken to be the default, and that's kind of the case on Earth. That's feminist theory analysis 101, so fair enough. Generally, in his mind, he can't conceptualize Gethenians as being she's, and he doesn't want to use it because, well, that would be disrespectful, obviously. So he uses he, him for all these people, but you have to keep in mind while you're reading the book that these people aren't men. So it's kind of weird. You have to actively keep that in mind and not picture them as men, which I kind of did, but I really tried to imagine them as very androgynous looking in my mind. It's not that easy to do. So Astravan starts off in the story as being, Prime Minister to the King of Karhide, but quickly enough he receives an order of exile basically because he's branded a traitor and has to seek refuge in the neighboring country, Orgarain. Astravan is someone who I think has a deep love of his country, and he actually does say so himself, or generally says it. There's a sense of loyalty to him, of being faithful and true to your nation, or to your people more precisely, and wants really to do what he thinks is best for the country, though that might not necessarily mean what's best in the eyes of the king, and that's kind of why he gets labeled a traitor and sent into exile, because he sees the opportunity presented by Genli I and his association with the Ecumen, and thinks, this is what my country needs, this is what we need to go forward. Because technologically speaking, Gethen is fairly advanced overall. Their progress is kind of at the same level as ours, or what it was in the 1970s in the Western world, but they took a lot longer to get there. It's much slower. But Astravan thinks that his country is stagnating, and so they need to go forward. And there's also this unhealthy rivalry with the nation of Orgarain, and he thinks, the Ecumen is the opportunity we have and we need to kind of all come together and move forward as a global people. And also, I think something pretty central to Astravan's character is his faith, his spirituality. So like I said, it's kind of a religion, but it's a religion in the sense that Buddhism and Taoism are religions or unreligions, if you see what I mean. It's called the Handarata, it's called the Handara, and the practitioners are called the Handarata. So he's a believer of that, and he practices some of their spiritual disciplines, and he has a sense of duty towards his family, and he has children for whom he writes in a diary, and that's very important to him. I really enjoyed him, reading the story from his perspective. There's something very calming about his presence. He's pretty sharp. He's not necessarily particularly intellectual, but he has very good instincts. He's very determined. He has a mission and he will see it through, which is actually quite important to how the story unfolds. Seeing their interactions, between Astravan and Genli was something really beautiful to read about. The relationship that unfolds between them, beautiful human connection beyond this weird divide of completely different physiologies and different cultures and planetary frameworks, whatever you want to call it. That's the best word for it. It was beautiful to read about. And then finally, I will talk about the themes. So the element that kind of smacks you in the face when you read this is, the ambisexuality, that's what Ursula K. Le Guin chose to call it, of the Gethenians. It is very different to read about that. Even as a feminist, or someone who aligns with feminism and who rejects gender and sex stereotypes and all that stuff, you're still used to, you know, as a mammal on planet Earth, you know, there are males and females. You can see a person and 99% of the time you can tell, well, that's a man and well, that's a woman. But on Gethen, like I said, you have to actively picture them as, take whatever celebrity you can think of that just looks androgynous, and you've got to apply that basic template to every person you encounter on Gethen. And then 10 days out of every month, they go through this kind of, I mean, it's kind of a period of estrus, you could call it, where they go through a rapid development into either male or female, and then their sex drive goes through the roof, and their whole society is built around that. Like, if you're a working person, it's perfectly fine to take that week off to go shag. You can also suppress them with hormones. Like I said, they are technologically advanced. They have birth control, they have hormonal treatments, they have advanced medicine. So they can choose to do that, but it's not, I mean, it's so culturally accepted for you to just have sex that week of the month and concentrate on that. It's not a big deal to just do it. And that period is called chemo. The whole society is built around chemo and the phase of non-chemo. I can't remember the name though, sorry. And that also means that every single human being on Gethen can both sire and bear children. Because of that, no human being on Gethen is as truly free as the human male on Earth, but nor is any human being on Gethen as truly oppressed as the human female on Earth, because it all goes back to that fundamental difference of sex and reproductive function, doesn't it? Again, Feminism 101. So none of the givens of sex-based oppression apply on Gethen. There is no sexism, there is no gender, there is no sex stereotyping. It doesn't exist. And yet they do have hierarchies of power, and they do have inequalities. They don't have war, though. Is that because there is no hierarchy of the male over the female and all that entails, on Earth at least? Or is it simply because it's bloody cold on Gethen? It's a harsh, harsh planetary environment. No one has the bloody time, energy to make war with one another. They're too busy trying to survive. So is it more a question of environment? And maybe it has nothing to do with sex at all. And I guess since I was already, you know, my memory of the themes around sexism and gender, etc., were really good and well preserved, I was more open to seeing, well, the other themes of this novel. One really prevalent that I didn't remember that much is world nationalism and patriotism and those kinds of political themes. What does it mean to be patriotic? Are patriotism and nationalism just different degrees on a spectrum? Are they inherently different things? Like, is patriotism good and nationalism bad? As I've sometimes seen it put. I'm not sure I quite agree with that, actually, personally. But then, what's love of country or love of one's people? I mean, what does it mean to be patriotic exactly? Can you love the place where you were born, where you live, without being patriotic? I don't think there are any definite answers. That's not the point to give you definite answers to those questions, but you're definitely meant to think about those questions. And in relation to the theme of gender, so if there are no gender politics and there's no sex-based hierarchy, what kind of hierarchy are you left with? Because I personally believe that sex-based oppression is the OG form of oppression. I think it all kind of derives from that. Do I believe humans would never have any kind of hierarchy if we got rid of patriarchy, androcracy, sex-based oppression, whatever you want to call it? No, I don't. I think we're social animals, and most animal species have hierarchies of some kind. I don't think hierarchies are necessarily bad either. You can have just or unjust hierarchies. Here, you definitely have hierarchies, though they aren't necessarily just either. What do abuses of power, what does injustice look like without sexual politics? Like I said, there's this very important notion of Shibgrethel, this notion of honor, of personal integrity, and really tiptoeing around other people's Shibgrethel and making sure you don't insult them or offend them. And what's interesting is that generally I kind of makes a comparison with male pride. So maybe there's a parallel to be made to that, since they don't have virility, the pride and assertiveness of the man, with a capital M, nor do they have like the sexual pride or vanity of the female, the stereotypical female of like, oh, I need to be attractive and stuff like that. So instead they have this Shibgrethel. So just because you don't have sexual politics doesn't mean society doesn't get needlessly complicated or convoluted in a way. And finally, there's a theme about, it's more spiritual, but there's also a purely perhaps technological aspect, like what's progress? Again, it's described that Gethenians have a high level of civilization civilization, but it goes a lot slower than it did on Earth, basically. There's a comparison made between a river or a torrent and a glacier. Both get to where they're going, but at very different paces because, well, glaciers move, but they move very slowly. So just because Gethen is stagnating technology-wise, or at least that's how generally I perceives it, doesn't actually mean that they're backwards or that they're inferior to societies or planetary cultures that have evolved very rapidly or much more advanced. There's also the concept of just because you can make progress doesn't necessarily mean you should. Like, generally I ask, why haven't you people invented airplanes for travel? It would make it a lot easier. And like, well, why? Why should we have? We walk efficiently, we have roads, and we have tank-type vehicles, land vehicles, for trade when the snows get 10 meters high or something. That's all we need. Why would we invest in flying machines when we don't really need them? We could make them, but what's the impetus? So there's also this question of drive, like progress for the sake of progress, going further and further just because. Well, why? And it goes back to the system of spirituality, the concept of being present in the moment and not trying to go in every which way and going 3,000 kilometers an hour just because you can. I guess it's used as kind of an exposition tool to explore these questions of progress versus just simply being present, being still, being alive, and appreciating the fact that you are alive now. The Left Hand of Darkness is a classic with a capital C. It won the Hugo and Nebula Awards for a reason. It's a classic of SFF literature for a reason. It's a classic of feminist SFF literature for a reason. It should be a classic of literature, period, as well. It's a beautiful, magnificent novel. I loved rereading this. You know, if I had to draw up a list of books to take on a deserted island, this would definitely be on that list. I mean, out of Le Guin's work, I guess I would take this, The Birthday of the World and Other Stories, and perhaps the word for world is forest. But definitely this and The Birthday of the World. And now, as usual, I will read some quotes from The Left Hand of Darkness. The soundest fact may fail or prevail in the style of its telling, like that singular organic jewel of our seas, which grows brighter as one woman wears it, and, worn by another, dulls and goes to dust. Facts are no more solid, coherent, round, and real than pearls are, but both are sensitive. No, I don't mean love when I say patriotism. I mean fear, the fear of the other. And its expressions are political, not poetical. Hate, rivalry, aggression. Terrans tend to feel they've got to get ahead, make progress. The people of winter, who always live in the year one, feel that progress is less important than presence. The unknown, said Fax's soft voice in the forest. The unforetold, the unproven, that is what life is based on. Ignorance is the ground of thought. Unproof is the ground of action. If it were proven that there is no God, there would be no religion, no Handara, no Yomesh, no hearth-gods, nothing. But also, if it were proven that there is a God, there would be no religion. The fact that everyone between 17 and 35 or so is liable to be, as Nim put it, tied down to childbearing, implies that no one is quite so thoroughly tied down here as women elsewhere are likely to be, psychologically or physically. Burden and privilege are shared out pretty equally. Everybody has the same risk to run or choice to make. Therefore, nobody here is quite so free as a free male anywhere else. Only in that unpossessiveness does it perhaps differ from what we call the maternal instinct. I suspect that the distinction between a maternal and a paternal instinct is scarcely worth making. The parental instinct, the wish to protect, to further, is not a sex-linked characteristic. One of the most dangerous fallacies is the implication that civilization, being artificial, is unnatural, that it is the opposite of primitiveness. Of course there is no veneer. Process is one of growth, and primitiveness and civilization are degrees of the same thing. If civilization has an opposite, it is war. To oppose something is to maintain it. To be an atheist is to maintain God. His existence, or his non-existence, it amounts to much the same on the plane of proof. Thus proof is a word not often used among the Handarata, who have chosen not to treat God as a fact, subject either to proof or to belief, and they have broken the circle and go free. It is a terrible thing, this kindness that human beings do not lose. Terrible, because when we are finally naked in the dark and cold, it is all we have. We who are so rich, so full of strength, we end up with that small change. we have nothing else to give. What is love of one's country? Is it hate of one's uncountry? Then it's not a good thing. Is it simply self-love? That's a good thing, but one mustn't make a virtue of it, or a profession. He was frank, and expected a reciprocal frankness that I might not be able to supply. He, after all, had no standards of manliness, of virility, to complicate his pride. I was hungry, overstrained, and often anxious, and it got worse the longer it went on. I certainly wasn't happy. Happiness has to do with reason, and only reason earns it. What I was given was the thing you can't earn, and can't keep, and often don't even recognize at the time. I mean joy. But it was from the difference between us, not from the affinities and likenesses, but from the difference, that love came, and it was itself the bridge, the only bridge, across what divided us. A profound love between two people involves, after all, the power and chance of doing profound hurt. Alone, the relationship I finally make, if I make one, is not impersonal and not only political. It is individual, it is personal, it is both more and less than political. Not we and they, not I and it, but I and thou. Light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. Two are one, life and death lying, together like lovers in Kemmer, like hands joined together, like the end and the way. And that was my review of The Left Hand of Darkness, that masterpiece of Le Guin's. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a comment, start a discussion if you have read this novel, if you would like to read it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if it left you indifferent. And well, I hope you all have a lovely day or evening. I shall see you in the next video. Bye bye!